Hello, welcome to this Centre for European Reform podcast, Unpacking Europe. My name is Charles Grant. I'm the director of the Centre for European Reform. I'm delighted to be joined today by Catherine Day, former Secretary General of the European Commission, who retired from the Commission in 2015 but is still very involved in European politics. We're going to talk about the 10th anniversary of the Brexit referendum. Some of you may have seen we published a book called a little booklet called 10 Years After the Referendum: The Past, Present and Future of the UK's Relationship with the EU. This contains 15 essays on what Brexit means, including an excellent little piece by Catherine Day. Thank you for that, Catherine. But what I'd like to focus on a bit in the podcast today is how Brexit looks to people in the EU, because you live now in Ireland, which is still part of the European Union, unlike England. And so from the EU's point of view, what do you think have been, let's look at the positive side. Have there been positive things about Brexit? Have there been benefits to the EU because of Brexit, do you think?
Well, I think overall the EU laments the departure of the UK for lots of reasons, but there have been positives. And I think probably the departure of the UK has facilitated decision making. I think none of the other member states really question the existence of the EU, and while they might complain every day, they want it to succeed. And I'll give you an example where the EU is just going through at the moment negotiation of its next 7-year budget. And each one of the previous rounds that I participated in was sheer hell, because the British had a fundamentally different concept as to what the budget should be. For the Europeans, it's a multi-annual budget designed to invest in long-term things, etc., etc. The British wanted to have an annual budget that would go up or down depending on the economy. And the other member states felt that would never work in such a big and diverse geographic area. So it's just one example of where decision making has become easier. Not easy, but easier.
Right. So that's one benefit of Brexit from the EU's point of view. What about the costs? Are there some disadvantages to the EU of the British having left?
Yes, lots of them. And I think everybody who is honest would be able to give you a list. I think, first of all, I think we missed the world view of the UK. The majority of EU member states are smaller, so they don't have that same global reach or understanding. And then I think, this may be a more technical point, but I think the EU really misses the technical expertise of the British system. And that was part of how the UK used to challenge every proposal, to take it down from the realm of high theory and question pragmatically, well, how will this work and what will it cost and what are the regulatory implications? And I think that questioning, nobody has stepped in to take the place of the UK. And I think that is probably affecting the overall quality of decision making in the EU.
Right. You're sitting today in Dublin, and Ireland is the country you know best. Ireland has perhaps been more affected by Brexit than many other EU countries. Could you say how the costs and benefit analysis might be slightly different from Ireland's point of view compared to other member states?
Well, it was a big shock to Ireland, and the initial forecasts were very pessimistic because despite Ireland diversifying its trade since it became an EU member state, the UK is still a very important market. And also, Ireland was using the land bridge across the UK to get to continental markets. So there was a lot of worry about all of that. But I have to say, I mean, two things I think have reduced the negative side of it and maybe increased the positive. One was there was a very unified approach. The politicians and the civil service and business, the whole country worked together to understand the impact and to get the best possible outcome. So that unity of purpose, I think, was very important. And then secondly, Irish business actually responded fairly quickly. So when I mentioned the land bridge, we have far less traffic going across the UK now and a lot more direct access to mainland European ports. So business has been able to pivot quite a lot. And of course, for Ireland, the whole Northern Ireland situation was very important. And the primary objective was not to have a border on the island of Ireland. So I think, all in all, the fears that were outlined at the beginning have not come to pass. And actually, a lot of new opportunities have come in their wake. Now, the UK is still a very important market, but Irish companies have learned that there are other opportunities out there and they have broadened the range of countries that they sell goods to and services to, because Ireland is, even where we produce goods, they tend to be fairly light, like computers and pharmaceuticals, where we don't have big, heavy exports. So the physical trade was maybe not as important as the intellectual trade and the exploration of linkages and other opportunities.
Do you think the special arrangements that are put in place for Northern Ireland so that there is still no land border between the north and the south, and Northern Ireland is in many respects in the EU single market, do they basically work, these special arrangements?
I don't think they work to the full that they could because of the politics in Northern Ireland. I think there's a reluctance in political circles to actually get the most out of them. But even before Brexit, the trade across that border between Ireland and Northern Ireland was very open, and the Northern Ireland economy was certainly benefiting from trade with the Republic of Ireland. And that has been largely enabled to continue. So I think the view in Dublin is that there could be more advantage from the arrangements than is currently being taken, but that's a question for the political level in Northern Ireland also to decide how far they want to maximise the advantages.
Right. One impact of Brexit has been on perhaps one could say, the economic philosophy of the European Union. The British were always free traders, committed to strong competition policy and liberal markets. When I first met you in 1989, you worked for Sir Leon Brittan, the then British Commissioner, who was a great proponent of liberal economics in the European Commission.
Yeah.
Are you a little bit concerned that perhaps because of the British departure, but for many other reasons too, like the fact that the world has changed in many ways, with everyone's more focused on economic security and the security of supply chain, are you concerned that the overall economic philosophy of the European Union has become, in some respects, more French, more protectionist since the British left? Though, as I said, I'm not saying it's just because of the British leaving, of course.
Mhm. No, I think I am because I think open trading has been a key part of the EU's success. And I do think, I mean, globalization has its faults, but it has lifted literally billions of people out of poverty. So I fundamentally believe that the open trading model is a better one than the closed trading model. So I think the debate still goes on inside the EU. There's fear about dependence on critical raw materials, needing to have, your own strategic autonomy. There's also, if you're dealing with partners like the US who don't stand by the deals that you've done, then there's a natural political tendency, I think, to want to retrench behind the barricades. But I think ultimately everybody pays a price for that. Now, there have been undoubtedly some excesses in globalization and free trade model, but they could be corrected without closing in on ourselves. As you say, this is an ideological battle that has gone on for decades. And I think it's like a seesaw, it will continue to seesaw in one direction or the other. But I haven't changed my fundamental belief that the open trading model is the better one for the EU.
That's sort of the spirit of Sir Leon Brittan lives on in the Commission in some
Well, I'm not in the commission anymore, so.
yeah, of course, right. And perhaps should look forward a bit to the future of the UK relationship now. I mean, we've had the sort of the Starmer government's attempts to achieve a reset with the EU with some fairly modest but useful steps forward, such as an agreement, close to an agreement on phytosanitary standards, that's plant and animal health, close to an agreement on emissions trading schemes merger, close to an agreement hopefully on youth mobility. But do you think in the long run the UK and the EU, because the UK likely to have a new government soon, can get closer? How close can they get? How would you see the relationship evolving in the coming years and even decades?
Well, I think we can and will get closer. I mean, I think the UK and the EU share the same fundamental values. The UK stood early with Ukraine, as the European Union does. It immediately came on the European side on Greenland. So I think on the big issues, we are very close, and that's an important starting point. I think there is still a way to go in Europe to get over the loss of the UK because it was also seen as a kind of spurning of what the EU stands for. But I think also a fundamentally different worldview between some in the UK and mainland Europe, to put it simply. So I think inevitably we will come closer because normally you trade and you engage economically with those who are geographically close to you. I think also building a much better European defence and security capacity is of equal interest to the UK and to the EU. I think it will be slow, though. I think the EU will take a lot of persuasion that the UK has a different attitude now from what it had when it was a member state and 10 years ago. And politics is always a very important part of any negotiation. The technocrats can usually work out the details, but there has to be a political willingness to take bigger steps. And given the political churn in the UK recently, I think the EU will want to watch and wait and see, do things settle down? And is there a government that over the medium term could deliver on whatever undertakings it might take in return for better access or closer involvement with the EU? So I think it will take time to rebuild that climate of confidence. I think the reset was a good thing. I think more can be done. But the more that is done, the more there will be conditions applied, and that's only normal, I think.
Right. It looks like we're going to have a new government in London led by Andy Burnham, who's somebody who seems to be relatively pro-European, but has never thought a great deal about the EU as far as I can see. What advice would you give to him and his ministers when they take office as to what should they do in order to get the best results from dealing with Europe?
Well, I think they should be realistic. There's no way of getting all the goodies without having to step up on the return. I do think there's a need for the UK political system collectively to talk differently to its own public about the EU. It's been very easy to knock it and to rubbish it, and that doesn't go down well with the EU. It makes it think, oh, nothing has changed, and why should we be more flexible in terms of the way that we want to work with the UK in future? So I think a combination of looking for the small steps, building on the reset. Fundamentally, I think the question any new British Prime Minister will have to answer is, what does the UK want from the EU? It's very hard to negotiate with somebody who doesn't know what they want. And as you know, the EU was willing to offer a much better deal to the UK than the UK wanted 10 years ago. So if you have somebody as a negotiating partner and they are clear, even if they want the sun, moon, and stars, you can start to negotiate and look for a landing zone. But if they're not really sure what they want, the negotiators will say, well, come back when you know what you want.
So I think one of the problems with Starmer's government was it took them about roughly a year to work out what they wanted.
That's okay. But I mean, in the meantime, the EU is moving on with its own life. It's not sitting on the sidelines waiting patiently.
Yes, I think quite a lot of British analysts of the European Union conclude that in the long run, the British should aim for something a little bit like the Swiss model in some respects, single market in goods, but not services. So not services because we want to have our own rules for the City of London. The single market in goods would help the British manufacturing industry quite a lot. And when a British official floated this recently in Brussels, I think there was quite a negative reaction. Often we hear the reaction, no cherry picking,
Mhm.
the indivisibility of the single market. Could you explain why the EU side seems to be relatively hostile to the idea of a Swiss type model in the future?
Well, I think because being in the EU is about give and take. So you get advantages, but you must contribute to making those advantages become real. So the single market is about the factors of production, if we go back to old-fashioned economics teaching. And you can have free movement of labor, goods, capital, but you must have free movement of people for it to be fair in the round. And I think the British absolute refusal to contemplate free movement of people will be a big barrier to making big jumps economically. And there is the wider politics as well. I mean, the UK is a much bigger country than Switzerland, and it was a member state. So I think that there will have to be persuasion of the EU by the UK that attitudes have changed, and you're not going to be negotiating a better economic arrangement with a country that's going to continue to denigrate what you are and how you do your business. So I think that's why the reactions are negative, because it still looks like the UK would like to pick only the advantages and not the disadvantages. And don't forget that the Swiss have accepted free movement, they have accepted dynamic alignment, and they have accepted to make financial contributions. So in the end, countries like Norway, for example, in the EEA, or even like Switzerland, I think you come very close to saying, well, if we're going to have all this balance of rights and obligations, why are we not in, where we have a seat at the table and can be shaping things? So it's complicated. And that's what I mean about the more you ask for, the more you have to give in order to get it.
If the British one day were prepared to accept something closer to freedom of movement and they were willing to make payments into the EU budget like Switzerland does and dynamic alignment, do you then think that the EU might consider allowing the British Swiss type model?
I don't know because I think that's not anywhere close in terms of years. And by the time you would get to the moment of taking that decision, the world will again be a different place. I mean, ultimately, and I think this is something maybe that not everybody in the UK fully appreciates, ultimately, the EU is a political body and it will decide on the basis of its own interests. Now, it comes across always as a very technical, technological rule-making body, but all of that is in pursuit of the political well-being of how Europe functions and how it can look after its citizens. And so every decision to do something different will require a political feeling that this is in the interest of the Union.
Well, what I take from some of your answers, Catherine, is that trust is important, and on the
Very
EU
important. Yeah.
side, there isn't you don't entirely trust the British not to behave better than they used to behave in the bad old days.
And that's not helped by the political churn. Like if you do a deal with Prime Minister X and they're not there in 2 years' time, what do you do then? Like so they will want to be sure that there has been more of a change in British attitudes than only 10 years allows one to speculate about, let's say.
Yes. The geopolitical climate of the world has darkened greatly since the Brexit
Yeah.
referendum. Russia is much more of a military threat to many parts of Europe than it used to be. China is a huge economic threat to parts of European industry. America is no longer seen as a trusted provider of security to Europe because of Donald Trump's second term of office. In these dark geopolitical times, obviously, I think many people in Europe want the British to get closer to the EU. And indeed, there is quite good cooperation on security. So Britain has, alongside France, led the coalitions of the willing for providing a reassurance force for Ukraine, for example, and some sort of naval force for the Straits of Hormuz. So, to what extent do you think the geopolitical environment could actually affect the UK's relationship with the EU?
I think it will a lot because everybody will be looking for like-minded allies with whom it can work more closely together to defend the collective interests. But I think again, it takes always two to tango. And it's not just about the EU being more open, it's also about the UK coming to a greater realization that it has a place in Europe, it has a role to play, and not being kind of wanting to have, one foot in the Atlantic and one on the European mainland. And it's not to say that you have to choose because the EU would like better relations with the US than we have at the moment. But I do think in the long term, there will be a closer relationship because the way the world is changing today anyway will require that. And I think as Mark Carney has said, middle-sized countries have to club together in defense of their values and their way of life as well as their economics. And I think that, both the UK and the EU, which is not collectively a middle-sized country, but nonetheless is made up of middle-sized countries, will see things like that. But then you use the right word, there has to be trust that there has been a change in the UK attitude and that will be an enduring one. And that remains to be seen.
Yes, I guess probably we'd all agree that in the current climate, we need to have closer cooperation on security between the UK and Europe. But some people in Britain, therefore would say, well, we're doing a lot together on security, so why don't we revisit the economic relationship, revisit the trade and cooperation agreement, and give us a better trade deal because we're helping on security? And that doesn't really work as far as many EU countries are concerned, does it? They don't make that
No,
connection.
no, because I mean, the security it is about the domestic interests of each constituent part. So I think it's as much in the UK's interest to have a closer defence and security relationship with the EU as it is in the EU's. And that's an area where I think a lot of progress can be made. And the EU is really ratcheting up and investing a lot of money in that now. It has woken up to the fact that it needs to do that. Let's put it like that. But on the trade and cooperation side, it's the negotiations would be a lot more hard-headed. And there, the fundamental question is if at the next general election you have a radically different kind of government in the UK, which is profoundly anti-EU, the EU will wait and see. So it will be willing to take small steps as proof of, goodwill and mutual interest, but not big radical steps until it sees how things are likely to to progress.
Right.
That's my opinion. Huh? That's
Fair enough. He's right to be wary of the British because our political system is certainly in some degree of chaos at the moment, and there's the risk of a anti-EU government taking office
well,
in London. But I say it's
and
far
not
from.
it's not only a risk in the UK. I mean, you know, look
Yes.
at the continent as well. There are worrying signs here and there, but we have to wait and see how they all pan out.
In London, I say it's far from certain that Nigel Farage will be the next prime minister. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But you're right to be wary. But I guess my point would be that many people in the EU seem to be fairly indifferent to the fate of the British economy. I mean, you want us to work on security with you, that's fine. But as for our economy, it's really our responsibility. And I would say that actually European Union should actually take a greater interest in the British economy because I think it's in Europe's interest to have a strong, thriving, economically successful Britain on the edge of Europe rather than a failing economy that's not doing at all well, festering on the edge of Europe.
Yeah, but I mean, the UK had the opportunities that it chose to leave behind. So the EU respects that, you know, like, okay, you don't want to be part of us, then you don't want to be part of us. That's like it cuts both ways because it over decades it's been accused of being interfering and micromanaging and all the rest of it. Now it stands back and the UK realizes that okay, maybe it was tedious, but there were advantages to it. So I think the EU is slightly waiting a bit more time for the penny to really drop with the population. And that's why I said I think there needs to be more fair and frank discussion with the public about why is the EU interesting? Why has it survived the euro crisis, the COVID crisis, all of these things? It's because fundamentally the countries believe that their future is better together than it will be by operating separately. And I think the UK has to come to that realization as well. Maybe in a more nuanced way. I mean, nobody is talking about the UK rejoining, and I think that should simply be off the agenda. What we're talking about is how much closer can we get that will be mutually beneficial, and what are the limits to that?
I think that's right. But there is a conversation in the UK now. I think the majority of the British people certainly understand that Brexit has been very damaging to the British economy. I guess my point would be that in the long run, the EU has an interest in Britain being a thriving economy on the edge of Europe rather than a festering economy.
Undoubtedly, but I mean, that's your choice now. That's not our choice. You know, I mean, the EU isn't advertising for people to come and have closer relations with it. It's open to discuss them. I come back to my point when those who are asking for it know what they want. And not just, well, we'd like all the advantages, but we don't really want any conditions that might possibly constrain us in some way. But that's not real life.
I guess if the British economy continues to do quite badly as it's doing at the moment, and the European economies continue to thrive, that's probably the best framework for the British seat to become closer. That's why we joined the EU in the first place
Mm.
in 1973.
Yeah, but I think there's also the EU is a dynamic body and it started as an economic arrangement, but there were always politics behind it. I mean, don't forget, it was about ultimately at the beginning about bringing two warring parties, France and Germany, together. So it has always evolved, but it has become over time because the members want it. It has become much more than just a trading organization, and that requires different ways of participating.
A very final question, Catherine. There's a lot of talk in Brussels about various sorts of variable geometry, to use the jargon. Even now, Chancellor Merz has proposed associate membership for Ukraine, whereby Ukraine would be in parts of this EU, but not all, without having full voting rights. And there's more and more talk of countries doing groups of countries, subgroups doing certain things together, but not everybody taking part. Do you think, in the long run, the move towards variable geometry might make it easier for the British to become a kind of half member of some sort, an associate member?
I mean, in the future, who knows? But I think these are fundamentally different situations. Countries like Ukraine want to join fully for security reasons. And if you go back to when the Baltic countries joined, they didn't only want to join the outer circle around the EU, they wanted to join the euro because they understood that to be really as safe as they could be, they had to be in the inner core of the EU. And I think Ukraine will certainly want full membership. So it will be a question of a timed transition of a partner who heart and soul wants to be in the EU and the EU will want to have them. So any arrangements that would accelerate things would be to secure the safety of Ukraine while they go on the path to full membership. So I think it's quite a different scenario.
Okay, fair
But
enough.
again, it comes back to my point about in the end, the EU is a political organism and it will not unnaturally always want to find the right answer to whatever new question pops up that does the best for its citizens. And that's really the bottom line, you know. So today things look a certain way, 5, 10 years time, they will undoubtedly look different.
I interpret what you said, Catherine, to mean, in essence, that if the British want to get closer in the long run, they need to understand it's a political project and they need to be
Yeah,
politically
in
aligned.
ways that I don't think they did even when they were members, actually, you know.
Fair enough. That's a good place in which to end. And thanks very much for your time, Catherine. And I hope everybody
Pleasure.
will go to CR's website to read your essay in our little publication called 10 Years After the Brexit Referendum.